What if everything you believed about strength, survival, and war was a lie? Imagine a species so fragile they break bones in battle, yet so relentless they keep fighting with shattered limbs and bloodied hands. This isn't fiction. This is humanity. And when elite alien soldiers mocked Earth's myths, one scarred war veteran stood up and said, "You haven't seen what I've seen." What followed was a terrifying truth that changed their galaxy forever. This is not just a story. It's a warning. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. The observation chamber aboard the alien dreadnought Ashvale echoed with the sound of idle chatter, clicks, and the occasional hum of deep space machinery. A group of young alien cadets lounged on resting platforms shaped to match their segmented bodies, their exoskeletons gleaming under the soft amber lights. It was their rest cycle, and with no immediate assignments, the conversation had turned toward one of their favorite topics, humans. Navigator Leto, the youngest and most outspoken among them, clicked his jaws with amusement. "Have you read those Earth archives?" One story said a human mother lifted a metal transport vehicle to save her offspring. Impossible. Their skeletal structure is too fragile. He laughed, a clicking sound that echoed off the chamber walls. The others joined in, amused by the absurdity of the tales. Technician Brill, known for his sarcasm, raised a small hollow tablet and scrolled through a file. "There's more. Listen to this one. A human soldier continued fighting after being shot 6 times. They say he patched himself up, using cloth and fire, then led a charge. A biological creature with no secondary hearts, no self-regenerating tissue. Still fighting. It's ridiculous." Cadet Noor, who was quieter than the others, tilted his head. "Why would their species spread such lies?" he asked softly. "To scare enemies." "It's bravado," Brill replied. "They're fragile beings, so they make themselves look terrifying through myths." Just then the chamber doors hissed open. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Every cadet straightened as Captain Malus entered. He was a decorated officer, his frame taller and heavier than any of them. His armor looked fused into his body, damaged in places and patched in others. His right lower limb was mechanical, and long scars ran across his chest and jaw. It was said that Malus had seen more wars than most soldiers, lived cycles, and survived missions deemed impossible. He didn't speak as he walked across the chamber, but he had paused. That pause sent chills down every cadet's spine. Without turning, Malus said, "You laugh because you've never seen a human bleed and keep moving." The room fell silent. Even the soft hum of the ship's systems seemed to fade into the background. Leto shifted uncomfortably. Brill's tablet dimmed in his hand. Malus finally turned, his voice low and heavy. "Do you think those stories are jokes? Do you think they come from nothing?" He walked toward them, his gait slow but purposeful. "I once believed the same, that they were exaggerations, silly stories to entertain soft minds. Then I faced them, not in books, in the field." Cadet Noor, eyes wide, whispered, "You fought humans?" Malus nodded once, his gaze steady. "I did. I led an elite squad during the Martian recon conflict. We were tasked with securing a human outpost. Intelligence said it was a science station, lightly guarded. We believed the mission would take less than a day." He stopped, looking down at his artificial limb. "It took less than an hour to lose half my team." Brill swallowed. "But they were scientists, weren't they?" "No," Malus said. "They were human." The cadets remained quiet, unsure how to respond. Leto tried to regain his confidence. "But surely, Captain, they're not stronger than us. We're built for battle. We've been genetically refined. They haven't." Malus smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "Yes, we are stronger, smarter, more efficient. But you're forgetting one thing. We were designed for war. They were born into it. Their species has never known safety. Everything in their history is a fight. Against nature, against each other, against time itself. You look at their biology and see weakness. I looked into their eyes and saw something else. Nor leaned forward. What did you see, sir? Melis's voice dropped. Refusal, a refusal to stop, to lose, to die. He looked at each of them, pausing long enough to make them feel the weight of his words. One human we faced had already lost an arm. We shot him again, through the chest. He bled, but he kept fighting. He didn't retreat. He didn't fall. He took 2 of my best soldiers with him before the 3rd finally brought him down. Even then it took time. Brill's antenna twitched. That's not possible. Melis took another step toward them. What's not possible to us is ordinary to them. Their bodies aren't just machines of flesh and bone. They are survival itself, wrapped in stubbornness and fire. Leto lowered his gaze. So, the stories are true? Not all, Melis admitted. Some are surely exaggerated, but every myth has roots. Every lie begins with a truth someone couldn't explain. He paused again. And when you laugh at humans, remember that you laugh from safety, from stories. I laughed once too. The chamber was quiet now. The same young cadets who had been so full of mockery and confidence now sat still, eyes fixed on their captain. Something had shifted in the air. The humor was gone, replaced by a deep, creeping curiosity. And something else. Fear. Melis turned, walking away from them slowly. Next time, he said, just before the doors slid, shut behind him. Ask yourselves why there are treaties and why they are never broken. The chamber stayed silent long after he left. And none of them laughed again. The red sands of Mars had once seemed so quiet, so still, when viewed from orbit. From the bridge of the alien cruiser Ashvale, it looked like nothing more than a lifeless planet, covered in rust and silence. But Captain Melis knew better. As he sat alone in his private quarters, eyes focused on a flickering projection of an old mission log, the images of what happened down there still pulsed in his memory like a fresh wound. That mission had been meant to be simple. They were told the human outpost on Mars was a research facility, non-military, low-risk, and poorly defended. The kind of operation new cadets were sent to learn discipline and execution. Instead, it had turned into a graveyard. Back then, Melis had not yet been captain. He was field commander of an elite recon squad, 11 of them in total, highly trained, physically superior, and fully equipped with stealth armor, pulse rifles, and neural comms. Their orders were clear: infiltrate, extract human tech, and return without alerting Earth Command. It was supposed to be quiet, but Earth had its own ideas about quiet. They had landed undetected in a valley near the outpost, hidden beneath thick dust storms. For 3 days they watched. The humans moved slowly, carelessly. They drank warm liquids, laughed with one another, and strolled across the compound with no sign of urgency. It was hard to take them seriously. They didn't look like soldiers. They didn't look like anything close to dangerous. I remember thinking, Melis muttered aloud, they look soft. That was his first mistake. When the order came to attack, everything began smoothly. Perimeter defenses were disabled. The team slipped inside the compound like shadows. They disabled communications with a single silent blast. No alarms, no panic. It looked like victory was moments away, until one human guard came around a corner too early. Melis remembered him well, young, lean, just a single rifle on his shoulder. The alien scouts fired without hesitation. 3 plasma bolts tore through his chest. By any logic, he should have fallen lifeless. But the human didn't fall. He staggered back, blood spilling down his uniform, and then did something unthinkable. He raised his weapon and returned fire. One alien dropped, then another. By the time the human was finally killed, 2 members of the team were gone. Melis could still hear the confused shouts in his comms. That wasn't supposed to happen. He didn't respond. He didn't have the words. The gunfire had awakened the rest of the compound. But what followed wasn't chaos. It was strategy. Doors slid open to reveal hidden weapons. Walls shifted, revealing armor caches. The so-called researchers moved like trained fighters, covering each other, moving in formations. These weren't scientists. They were soldiers in disguise. What stunned Malus most wasn't their preparation, but their endurance. He saw a human woman lose an arm to a plasma shot. She screamed, yes, but then she picked up a heated metal rod and seared the wound closed herself. Then with her remaining arm, she kept firing. Another man took a blast to the leg, shattering bone. Instead of crawling away, he dragged himself to a doorway and held that position for 20 minutes, taking out 3 more aliens before he finally bled out. No retreat, no surrender. Malus had tried to call for extraction, but High Command refused. The mission was still labeled as low risk. They didn't understand what he was facing, not yet. The turning point came when they lost contact with Scout Jin. He had gone to secure the data core but never reported back. When they found him, his body had been ripped open. His attacker had used a shard of broken glass as a weapon, no tech, just rage and precision. That's when Malus made the choice to pull back. But they were already too deep. Traps began appearing, crude but deadly. Tripwires, weighted nets, burning oil. One team member fell into a concealed pit. Another was caught in a hallway rigged to explode. This wasn't a retreat anymore, it was survival, and then they met him, the human in charge. A man named Callan Rourke. Malus could never forget that name. Rourke didn't look extraordinary. He was older, his body lean, his face scarred and tired. But there was something in his eyes. A calm, calculating fury. He moved like someone with nothing left to lose. And unlike the others, he didn't just defend, he hunted. Malus lost 3 more soldiers in the forest outside the compound. Rourke had escaped into the Martian canyon system, bleeding and barely walking. But somehow, he stayed ahead of them. He laid traps, doubled back, and led the aliens into choke points where they were picked off one by one. I should have pulled out, Malus said to himself, watching the screen flicker with old camera footage. I should have known then, but I didn't. In the final confrontation, Rourke was barely alive. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, his arm broken and dangling, yet he moved like a machine, fast, deliberate. He fought Malus hand to hand, and despite everything, he almost won. Malus had never told anyone what Rourke said before collapsing. The words weren't angry. They were quiet. You came here thinking we were weak. You'll leave knowing we're something else. Malus closed. The projection. The past was heavy, but it was also necessary. The cadets on Ashvale needed to hear the truth before their ignorance cost them what it almost cost him. Everything. The wind on Mars wasn't like the winds on other planets. It didn't howl or roar. It whispered. It carried dust instead of rain, and silence instead of life. Captain Malus remembered the way the red grains had blown across the canyon floor like tiny ghosts, erasing footprints as soon as they were made. Somewhere out there, under the shadow of rust-colored cliffs, a human was waiting. And he was dying. But not stopping. The mission was already broken. 7 of Malus's squad were dead. Only 4 remained, including him. Their original objective, secure the research compound and retrieve any valuable human technology, had turned into a desperate struggle to stay alive. They had faced warriors before, they had fought against other galactic species, but never like this. Never against a single wounded enemy who moved through the Martian wilderness like it was his own hunting ground. His name was Callan Rourke, though Malus hadn't known it at the time. To them, he had simply become the human. The one who refused to fall. The one who set traps so clever, so simple that they seemed impossible to escape. Scout Kira had been the first to die after they left the compound. She had spotted a trail of blood leading into a narrow ravine and followed it too quickly. The wire across the path was almost invisible. When her foot caught it, sharpened steel rods, clearly salvaged from destroyed lab equipment, swung down from above. They pierced through the weak points in her armor. She died in seconds. Malus remembered how the remaining three had stood in silence, staring at her body. None of them had said anything. There was nothing to say. She hadn't been careless. The trap had been perfect. That fact scared them more than anything else. They moved slower after that, checking every path, scanning every rock, every shadow. But it didn't matter. The human had laid false trails, decoys. He used his own blood to create fake escape paths, and they fell for it. Ensign Peter split off from the group, following what looked like a fresh trail. He radioed in, saying he saw movement. Those were his last words. When they found his body, Malus felt something deep inside him twist. Peter had been ambushed from above, dropped on from a ledge, just like an old jungle predator. His throat had been cut with a shard of metal and his weapon was missing. No advanced gear, no energy rifles, just cunning. Just rage. Now it was only Milas and Yiran, their field medic. They barely spoke, each step heavy with fear. Milas had never known fear like this before, not in the same way. He had faced entire battalions with confidence. But now, in the vast silence of Mars, the fear was different. It was patient, quiet, waiting. That night the temperature dropped as the twin moons rose. The shadows were long and full of movement, but every time Malus turned, nothing was there. Just wind, just dust. Yet they could hear things, scrapes, taps, deliberate sounds meant to make them nervous. The human wasn't just running. He was hunting. Yiran began to crack under the pressure. He fired randomly into the dark, shouting curses into the empty canyon. Malus tried to calm him, but it was too late. A single shot rang out, perfectly placed, right through the base of Yiran's skull, where the armor was weakest. He dropped, without a sound. Malus didn't see the shooter. There was nothing but silence after the gunfire. He stood alone, surrounded by open land, but it felt like the walls were closing in. He had never felt so small. He started walking, slowly, carefully. Every step was measured. He didn't follow trails anymore. He followed instinct. The human had become more than an enemy. He had become a force of nature. It wasn't long before Malus stepped into the final trap. Not one set with wires or pits. This was psychological. The human let Malus hear his voice. A soft laugh echoed through the canyons, not mocking. Calm, controlled. You came here to capture. But now you understand what it means to be hunted. Malus spun around, weapon raised, scanning every rock. His body was ready to fire, but his mind was frozen. The voice wasn't angry. It was certain. The human wasn't afraid of dying. That's what made him so dangerous. The next time they met, it wouldn't be from a distance. It would be close. Too close. Malus tried to send a distress signal. The connection was weak. High Command wasn't responding. He was alone. That night Malus didn't sleep. He didn't dare. He kept his back to a rock wall and his weapon ready. And still, the human found him. Not with a gun, but with presence. A shadow moved through the corner of his vision. When he turned, nothing was there. Then another. Then another. The human wasn't just nearby. He was circling. At dawn, Malus found blood on the ground, but it wasn't his. Somehow, the human was still injured, still bleeding. Yet he moved faster than ever. When the confrontation finally came, it was sudden. Malus caught a glimpse of movement above him and fired, but the human dropped too quickly. They crashed together into the dirt, weapons forgotten. It was fists and fury. The human's arm was clearly broken. Malus could see the bone pushing against the skin, but he still struck like a machine. Again and again. Malus managed to land a blow that should have ended the fight. His blade punctured the human's side, slicing through organs. But the human didn't stop. He grabbed the blade with his own body, locked Malus in place, and kept attacking. Even as blood poured from his mouth, even as his body began to give out, the human's eyes never changed. They burned with something Malus couldn't name. Not anger, not survival. Something deeper. When the emergency transport finally arrived, Milas was barely conscious. The human lay dead beside him, but even in death, his grip had to be pried from Malus's arm. It took 4 medics to do it, and Malus never forgot what the human whispered before he died. Now you know. The treaty was signed in silence. No celebration, no grand speeches, no exchange of gifts. Just quiet, tense breathing in a sealed chamber where neither side dared blink for too long. Captain Malus stood behind his chancellor, his artificial limb locked in place, his scarred face unreadable. Across from him stood the human delegation, calm, still, and perfectly aware of the power they held simply by standing there. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The aliens had once believed they were the dominant species. With superior bodies, better weapons, and years of conquest behind them, they thought humans would fold like so many others had. But they hadn't. They had resisted. And more importantly, they had taught the galaxy something no one wanted to learn. Fear doesn't always come from size or strength. Sometimes it comes from something smaller, quieter, and far more dangerous. The refusal to give up. Malus's experience on Mars had changed everything. When he returned, barely alive and carrying the full weight of that mission's failure, High Command tried to dismiss it as an anomaly. They called it a tactical misstep. They said the human had simply been lucky. But when Malus insisted on debriefing every officer himself, when he showed them the data and the scars, things began to shift. The military analysts reviewed the footage. They ran simulations. Over and over, they plugged in new variables, added new equipment, increased troop numbers. And still, the humans either won or forced mutual destruction. Even when facing overwhelming odds, their losses only made them more dangerous. They adapted. They improvised. They fought smarter the longer. The battle continued. One simulation showed a full-scale invasion of Earth. The result wasn't a clear victory or even a long battle. It was a slow, grinding collapse. Not of the humans, but of the invaders. The humans didn't need better weapons. They only needed time. With every defeat, they would learn. With every setback, they would evolve. They would lose 10 battles, if it meant winning the 11th. And when they won, they didn't just reclaim ground, they erased their enemy from it. What disturbed the alien command most wasn't just the simulations. It was what Malus had said during his final report. They die, he said, but they die with their hands still locked around your throat. No one argued after that. The peace accord was fast-tracked. Every hostile operation was frozen. Every plan to occupy human territories was shelved. An entire generation of warriors was pulled from training. The galaxy shifted its focus from conquest to diplomacy. Not because they wanted peace, but because they finally understood the cost of war with humans. In private, scientists were assigned to study the human body and mind. What they discovered only deepened the fear. Human biology had evolved around the idea of long-term endurance. Their ancestors had hunted by outlasting prey. Their muscles didn't need rest as often. Their pain tolerance could spike during crises. They didn't shut down under stress. They sharpened. More unsettling was the emotional data. Humans fought harder when they were afraid, harder still when they were hurt, and when someone they cared about was in danger, they became unstoppable. No other species in the known galaxy fought for reasons so deeply personal that more than anything forced the treaty. Back in the present, Malus watched the human ambassador quietly reviewing the signed documents. He was older, with deep lines across his face and silver in his hair, but his posture was strong. He reminded Malus of the soldier on Mars, not in looks but in presence. Calm, but ready. Friendly, but dangerous. After the final document was sealed, the human gave a simple nod and turned to leave. No threats, no smug smiles, just an understanding. As he walked past Malus, he paused only once. "You made the right choice," he said. "It's better this way." Malus nodded, his voice steady. "I know." When the room emptied and the officials returned to their ships, Malus stayed behind a moment longer. He looked down at his artificial hand, flexing it slowly. He remembered the final grip of that human in the canyon. How even in death his fingers hadn't released. That kind of willpower couldn't be trained. It had to be born. The next generation of cadets would never hear the full story. They would be taught that peace was a logical decision, that it was about balance, fairness, mutual understanding. But Malus knew better. Peace had come not through agreement, but through fear, through survival. Through a mission where only one alien walked away, and only after nearly being torn apart by a dying human. He walked out of the chamber and looked up at the stars. There were many more species out there, some more powerful, some more advanced. But only one had forced his people to sign a treaty with blood still on their hands, and that species was still watching, still waiting. Because peace, for humans, wasn't weakness. It was just a pause,